The image that you see before you today is Blessed Christian de Cherge. He's known as one of the Tiberian martyrs. He was a 20th century figure, so we actually have photographs of the guy. Before I say more about his life, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means for someone to be a martyr. So, martyrdom stems from the earliest centuries of Christianity, when individuals were often at times killed because of their Christian faith. In some cases, you'll see the word martyr then derives from the Greek word that means witness. This was what that meant was that these Christians who died for their faith were witnessing to the importance and truth of Christianity. Now, things changed a little bit with time, because after Christianity was legalized in the Roman Empire in the 4th century, there were less opportunities to die for one's faith. And so in my second image here, what you see is a monk. This became known as a form of white martyrdom as opposed to the red martyrdom of like Saint Sebastian there in the first image. White martyrdom meant that one's life reflected the importance and truth of the gospel without actually shedding your blood for Christianity. Nevertheless, your life still witnessed to the importance of Christianity, and so that was known as a form of martyrdom. When someone is killed for their faith, then they are declared a blessed, because once you are called a martyr, you are considered to be part of the what we have there, the saints in heaven, the communion of saints, and those individuals in turn intercede for and pray for us here on earth. So Christian's technical designation is as a blessed. He gets a bump up because of his martyrdom. It speeds up the canonization process a little bit for individuals who are known to have died for their faith. So now on to Christian. He was born in eastern France. There you can see the little red pin to sort of mark where he was born, that area of France. He was born in 1937 in the eastern region of France, and his family spent a good deal of time when he was growing up in North Africa in a country called Algeria. It was a French colony at the time when he was growing up. When he returned to France at some point, and then enlisted as a military individual later in life when he was still a young man, and returned to Algeria in that capacity during the War of Algerian Independence. This was a conflict that was repeated several times around the world during this period when when formerly colonized countries started to fight for their own independence from those earlier colonizing places like France. So while he was there during the Algerian War of Independence, in a conflict, in a situation of conflict, a Muslim man named Muhammad intervened on behalf of him and actually ended up saving his life. Christian, at the moment that he was saved by this man, who he had known it before, he said that he would vow to pray for the man. And Muhammad replied that Christians don't know how to pray. It's an interesting comment. Nevertheless, this was actually Muhammad's last day on earth. He died that night, probably because of his effort to protect Christian during this time. Christian, in turn, took this series of events as a sign that he has to give his own life to the people of Algeria, because one of them had died to save his life, even though that person was a Muslim. So he ends up moving later in his life back to Algeria after he's got some training. And in 1871, he returns to Algeria and takes up residence at a place called the Abbey of Our Lady of Atlas. It's in Tibherine, Algeria. You can see there, it's in the north part of the country. This is after Algerian independence, and so now it's run independently by people who were from Algeria. The war was successful, in other words. His community served, among other things, the medical needs of the Tiberine community. And it was a Christian spiritual presence along and among a predominantly Muslim population in the region. Their community was a place for dialogue between Christians and Muslims, and Christian himself studied and had a great respect for Islam over the years of his ministry in Algeria. Then, in the 1990s, another war broke out in Algeria, known as the Algerian Civil War. This was a conflict between Islamic militants and the official government of the country. It left many Muslims in the country, including the Muslims in the town of Tiberine, where Christian lived, sort of in the lurch. They're stuck between these sort of governmental forces and then these extremist forces that were trying to take over the country. At a certain point, the extremists in the region started killing any foreigners that were present in the country. And that put Christians' community at great risk because they were all Frenchmen. They were all white men from France. And they decided, despite the risks that came with this decision, that they were going to stay in imitation of Christ's vulnerability that he assumed in the incarnation. Right? Christ came to be with us, regardless of the dangers that came with that. So in 1996, some of these extremists took 7 of the monks at Tiberine hostage. Christian was among them, and they were killed 2 months later. Now, prior to his kidnapping, he could kind of anticipate that this was coming. This was not completely surprising to him. He had written a document that's known today as his Last Testament, in which he expresses how he hopes that people will think about his death at the hands of Muslims after the fact. So he has some really beautiful words to say here. I'm going to read this. I'm sorry, but I'm going to do some slide reading in this case. I do not see, in fact, how I could rejoice if the people I love were indiscriminately accused of my murder. It would be too high a price to pay for what will perhaps be called the grace of martyrdom, to owe it to an Algerian, whoever he might be, especially if he says he is acting in fidelity to what he believes to be Islam. I am aware of the scorn which can be heaped on the Algerians indiscriminately. I am also aware of the caricatures of Islam which a certain Islamism fosters. It's too easy to soothe one's conscience by identifying this religious way with the fundamentalist ideology of its extremists. Obviously, my death will appear to confirm those who hastily judged me naive or idealistic. Let him tell us now what he thinks of his ideals. But these persons should know that finally my most avid curiosity will be set free. This is what I shall be able to do, God willing. Immerse my gaze in that of the Father, to contemplate with him his children of Islam, just as he sees them, all shining with the glory of Christ, the fruit of his passion, filled with the gift of the Spirit, those whose secret joy will always be to establish communion and restore the likeness, playing with the differences. Now, before I say anything about the symbols in the image, I just want us to reflect a little bit more about what Christian's life might mean for us here living in the Twin Cities today. Right? I mean, there's a growing Muslim population here in the Twin Cities. They're culturally different, they're ethnically different than most of us, they're religiously different than a Catholic community like ours. And there are similarities theologically between Muslims and Christians. And in some of those instances, there's a lot of compatibility between Christianity and Islam. But Christians also believe that Islam contains serious religious errors about Jesus, for instance, among other important things as well. Despite those differences, Christian de Cherge shows us that we have a responsibility to understand the situation of individuals like them and to stand up when the vulnerable in their communities are attacked. Christians are not indifferent to violence, no matter who the object of that violence is, and no matter how different or even wrong we think those people are. We must strive to see them the way God sees all human beings, whom he wishes to be saved. What Christian says is shining with the glory of Christ, the fruit of his passion, filled with the gift of the Spirit. So in the image that we have, our artist Aaron Wee has put together for us, composed for us, you'll see a couple of images. We see on the desk in front of him a rosary. This is a sign of his Marian devotion because the community, as I mentioned earlier, was called the Our Lady of Atlas Monastery. You can see an image of Mary there in the second picture there as well. And then there's a little sneaky thing in Christian's hand. This is the word God in Arabic. Now, right, it's the word Allah, right? In Arabic-speaking Christianity, as well as in Islam, the word Allah is used by both to describe God. Sometimes in American discourse, we use the word to refer specifically to like a Muslim view of God, but Arabic-speaking Christians also use that word, and Christian himself would have used that word in his own community when he was speaking to the Muslims in the region about the Christian God as well. He had a long history of study of Islam, right, and a deep respect for that tradition. And so the symbol appears on his hand because of his study of and ministry to the Muslim community in northern Algeria. If you want to learn more about Christian, there is a movie about the life, well, at least the ending of the lives of the Tiberine martyrs. It's a film called Of Gods and Men. You can see the details there. It's a really beautiful film. Some of the subtitles aren't great. It's in French, so you're going to have to read along with it. But it's and it has some depictions of violence, so you may want to be attentive to that if you're going to show it to younger children. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful film, and it's a really great reflection on the way in which Christian, pours himself out, and the community pours themselves out in imitation of Christ, in service to the population that they came to serve.